Hello? Anybody here? Huh. What's that sign say? Do not step in the dark matter. That's weird.
So, you dare step in the dark matter's domain? I shall crush you like an ant!
4, 3, 2, 1. Yep, that's about how long it takes before he falls in on himself.
Who are you anyway?
I'm JP Holding. Been in the neighborhood a while, seen your stuff, and just wanted to stop by and say it sucks so bad that I won't bother answering any of it.
What?
Yeah, I mean, come on. To be fair, some of it's on topics I don't deal in, but anywhere you do touch on my subject matter, it's like you're refuting some kindergarten version of what I believe. Look. This one on the atonement. Stupid. No hint of knowledge of the reciprocal patronage template that informs the doctrine. No sense of difference between salvation and rewards or of the perpetual covenant obligations of the elect. Then this one. Some kind of blather on hell. Sheesh. You ever hear of honor and shame as a function of the experience of hell as opposed to literal flames? Do you even know about the relevance of dramatic orientation to their use of strong images and language? And what the heck kind of short shrift is all that to give Christian evidences? And then you got crap like this one, which is just a bunch of whining about how bad you think atheists are treated. Heck, you think you have it bad? You want to try some real persecution like the stuff Christians are getting in the Sudan right now? Hey, want to see my version of the secret life of atheists? Here. So, that's why I won't be bothering with you. Unless...
Unless what?
By any chance are any of the prior 2,524 dark matters any smarter?
Look, you. I'm smart. I graduated summa cum laude.
Oh, really? Well, then maybe you'd like to prove your mettle.
Bring it on.
Okay, here.
What's that?
A test of your biblical knowledge. Take it. Come on, take it. It won't bite. Oh, here, I'll read you the questions. In Greco-Roman rhetoric, what portion of an argument does a writer use to provide examples? Which Egyptian divine figure is considered a hypostasis? Who's the leading writer on Christian pacifism?
I'm melting! 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 Curse you, Holding! Curse you!
Huh, perfect. Dark Chicken 2525. Okay, look, Dark. Since you're obviously too chicken to take my religious knowledge test, I'm going to start grading you on your biblical knowledge of the sort I specialize in. I'll start with this production of yours. Lots of childish whining, typical short shrift to apologetics arguments, and anti-scholarship coming out of the pores. Let me give you just 3 main examples. First, this is the really big one. You pose this contest between Elijah and the priest of Baal as some sort of contradictory exercise to stated principles of not putting God to the test. You know, this is a clear example of the sort of knowledge you so sorely lack, and from it I can see why you're so anxious to run away from my religious knowledge test. Get a clue, Dark. This whole episode at Mount Carmel was a classic example of what in an agonistic society was regarded as an honor challenge. It wasn't a debate, and it wasn't a test. It was Yahweh challenging Baal to a public showdown. You may as well call a football game or a chess match a debate. And that's also why Elijah was tossing insults, by the way. Ironically, that's one of the few things you do get right. The whole point was ponage. Now, I know your little mind is working overtime because you have no idea what I'm talking about. So let me add that Elijah in this context was acting as Yahweh's authorized covenant broker, while the priest of Baal acted as Baal's brokers. So Elijah's role would precisely have been to issue the honor challenge on Yahweh's behalf. It wasn't God showing up on demand. Jesus was God's covenant broker too, but the honor challenge there was a different one. Jesus was one party and Satan the other, and the point was for Jesus to resist the temptations without any aid as a way to validate his own divine identity. So yeah, there, bringing God the Father in would have been a test because the Father was an outsider to the challenge. But in the case of Elijah, it was God who was a party to the challenge. Now, second. This one's more trivial, but it's just as much a reflection of your abject ignorance. You're whining here about Elijah using water during a drought. Well, let me show you something. Know what this is? It's a satellite view of the modern city of Haifa in Israel. Haifa is built on the north slope of Mount Carmel, which I had Google Maps marked with that A. You know what this is right here? It ain't Porky Pig's sandbox. It's the Mediterranean Sea. It's only a couple of miles away, so that's an obvious place to get water. And duh, it's not even drinkable, so there's no issue of wasting something drinkable. And if you don't like that, it also happens there's a spring at the base of Mount Carmel. One so productive it helped provide water by this aqueduct for the New Testament-era city of Caesarea. So if anyone there was thirsty, there was plenty of water there for them to drink, and for Elijah to use in the honor challenge. Oh yeah, and you seem to forget that according to the story, it rained immediately after this. Water and scads for the thirsty. I mean, good grief, this is simple stuff, Dark. How could you possibly be so insensate as to miss it? Did your degree in magna cum laude go on vacation when you made this one? One last thing I'll highlight, and it's not so much a mistake as an example of your profound bigotry. I have to ask, what's the deal with you fundy atheists making an issue of people living in the desert? I mean, come on, this sort of comment would be rightly considered racist if it was made about other ethnic or racial groups. So what gives you fundy atheists a free pass when it comes to referring to Near Eastern people in the desert? By the way, technically the area around Mount Carmel isn't even desert. It's on the edge of what's called the coastal plain. So you're not only being racist by calling the Israelites desert people for derogatory purposes, you're also showing your ignorance of the topography of the Bible. Also, what's the deal about saying this honor contest being held makes them more important than millions of people today? Apart from that being a short shrift of the evidence we do have, which is actually more than sufficient, I guess it doesn't occur to you that having events like those long ago made it possible for us to have situations today where we can have oral debates instead of honor contests. You need to get through that head of yours that the priests of Baal were brokers of Baal's patronage, his official representatives. You think if Elijah just let them live, they were going to give up, go home, and watch TV? No. The honor of Baal had just been blown out of the water. They consider it their solemn duty to get some payback. The whole contest was effectively the result of a declaration of war between Yahweh and Baal as suzerains. And in this case, since Yahweh was reckoned the owner of the land of Israel, the priests of Baal represented an invading force. I mean, sheesh. You whine enough as is about Christianity. How'd you like to live in a world where their religion was still around? So look, until you get over this crappy education of yours, there's just no way I can take you seriously. Now you going to man up and take my religious knowledge test and challenge, or what? I guess he'll just keep laying eggs. Well, here we go again with another of your backwards vids. If you put half as much work into thinking about your arguments as you do into the animation, you might actually pass kindergarten level sometime. Your confusion here is basic, and it's the sort of thing any first-year philosophy student, or heck, even a kindergartner, could figure out, to say nothing of an expert on ancient legal codes. I gave a more detailed answer to this sort of abject stupidity in this series I made, but let me sum it up for you at a level you might be able to understand. Basically, Dark, the moral code of the Bible is just like any other moral code in having a hierarchy of relevance. Some aspects reflect an absolute and objective moral background, but others reflect a potentially subjective application of some objective moral that lies behind the application. My favorite example is this one concerning the law about roofs having railings. The law itself is subjective to the extent that it's based on the assumption that people lived and worked on their roofs, as they do even today in Middle Eastern countries. But behind that subjective application there lies an objective moral basis, which could be summed up as saying, you do what you should to make sure people don't injure themselves. Now your main focus was on how stoning was used, but that's even more confused on your part since stoning is a penalty, not a moral standard. A penalty can be determined according to the danger posed to society, which is something that can change frequently according to varying social factors. So yeah, the penalty is going to be one of those subjective applications behind which there lies an objective moral. We can yap all day about where to draw the lines on these things, but the bottom line is, you're engaging in one of your typical oversimplifications. Not to mention the fact that you don't even get that the former covenant is for a theocratic government, while the newer one is essentially between God and a social in-group. A social in-group by itself wouldn't have the means to impose civil penalties. These are huge differences that you're entirely oblivious to. So when are you going to shape up on the scholarship, huh, Dark? Ew, I don't know how he can do that without barbecue sauce. Okay, this one won't take long because your vid this time at least is mercifully short. If it were running longer, we'd need to report you to the Geneva Convention. As I once said before, this is pretty pathetic as a short shrift of the theistic proofs and Christian evidences. Essentially, you're whining that God doesn't do any dog and pony shows for you. The whole argument about God revealing himself being contrary to free will is true to an extent, but I only buy that to the extent that I think the evidence is more than sufficient for anyone to make the right basic choices. In other words, the evidence is 100% sufficient and you're whining for 150% evidence. I mean, really, Dark, you're trying to tell us that all the evidence out there isn't at the very least equivalent to a shout-out? Give me a break. That might be more believable coming from you if you showed anything like the depth of knowledge needed to make such an evaluation. As it is, you run from what is a relatively simple test I offer, one which would be simple if you were even a quarter of the authority you popped yourself as being. Here's the reality. Fundy atheists like you aren't passively calling for help from a fire. You're actually sitting in your own little world pathetically trying to argue that there is no firefighter and that none of his hoses, trucks, or equipment exists, or that none of it works. Don't tell me otherwise and crap like the idea of Jesus not existing is so popular with fundy atheists these days. And of course, for the record, you're on about hell as literal fire, and that's another issue you need to educate yourself about. Shame, Dark, not literal fire. Read the text in agonistic terms. God didn't start any fire, and there is none. You got anything to say this time? Look, drop the chicken form, okay? That point's been proven. Morph into something else suitable to your true nature.
Huh? What's agnostic mean?
Yeah, somehow I knew that was coming. You know, when you do crap like this, it's not easy to tell if you're being funny or just stupid. If you're aiming for funny, be advised that the level of ignorance displayed rates it somewhere on the humor scale between a burning hotel and a dental appointment. If you're being stupid, which is where my vote is, well, I haven't the slightest idea where you get these ideas about magic sperm from, unless you borrowed some doctrine from Joseph Smith and filtered it through a 5-year-old. Let's get right to the point. The critical description is here in Luke 1:35, and there are two key words. The first is this one. Now I know your little juvenile mind is working overtime here, but no, there were no sexual connotations to it. As you can see by the parallel example involving the Holy Spirit, the meaning is little more than a sense of arrival at a location. The second word is this one, and this is really the key to the whole thing. The second passage is an example of how it was used elsewhere by Luke. The third and fourth passages are what scholars suggest Luke was alluding to. Either one would indicate that what was happening with Mary didn't involve magic sperm, but an act of divine creative fiat. The Spirit was God's hypostatic principle of action and life-giving creation, and that's what defines the conception of Jesus, not your grade school permutation. Well, you think you can get your mind out of the gutter and be a little more sophisticated next time?
Nah, I like it down here.
Guess he has to go where his fan base lives. Okay, this time we'll take two for the price of one. Partly because they're related, but also to get the agony of your poor scholarship over with more quickly. I briefly commented on what was lacking in the top one before, and it's mostly rendered moot by my own take on the atonement. So I'll just point out a few things. First of all, the court analogy only goes so far, and is the chief area where you screw up. More accurately, Yahweh would enact the role not of the judge, but of the prosecutor. It's actually Jesus who enacts the role of judge. I guess when you were doing your Bible study you missed a few things, eh? Figures. Beyond that, the courtroom analogy breaks down. There's no parallel in the courtroom for the sort of patronage relationship I explained in my atonement vid. What it does show, though, is that you screwed up royally with the accept my free gifts scenario. Get this straight, Dark. What's free is entrance into the covenant, just like it's free to sign a lease. But after that, there are these little things you're missing called covenant obligations. You've got Nazi boy here doing nothing but thanking the judge and Jesus, and then he's off scot-free, never to be seen again. Well, check these out. You see what happens to the guy who just says, "Oh, right," and doesn't do anything else? You tell me where you think some guy who runs off with just a couple of thank yous will end up in this scenario. The key here is what I showed in this vid. Faith properly defined means loyalty, not just mouthing some formula. Accountability, you can see it as plain as day in the very word loyalty. Nazi boy won't get to just mouth a few words and then run off and play like you have in your vid. He'll have work to do, and if he won't do it, he'll get zero but the skin on his teeth. And just a guess, but I think there's a pretty good chance his assignment would be to somehow serve people like his victim. By the same token, in this other vid, you have these guys which you're thinking live their entire lives as degenerates, still getting all the joy based on a mere mouthing of a formula. Yeah. I see that. You can put back the no true Scotsman fallacy. Even a child knows what loyalty means, just like everyone knows what it means to be a patriot. I mean, come on, Dark. If Osama bin Laden had professed at some time in his life to be a true American patriot, you think that would get anything but a bunch of laughs? Of course not. So don't give me that no true Scotsman crap when I question whether a simple profession is enough to certify Christian belief when compared with a life of activity that contradicts that belief. Now, just to be clear here, the works don't save, but they are the natural and inevitable product of an earnest profession of loyalty, or faith. You can check this article I have for more explanation. The point is, it's not the cheap grace you make it out to be. And by the way, what's forgiven here is not the sin against your Miss Thompson victim. What's forgiven is the sin as an act against God, as moral authority in creation. So again, in the courtroom analogy, Yahweh is like the state, the one whose laws were violated, and the victim of the crime becomes a witness for the prosecution, which also means your part 2 of that justice vid fails because it's not just between the two parties. And remember too what I said about the contextual definition of forgiveness in the last vid. Now on this, I've already pointed out that you need to dump this kindergarten view of hell, and that's a flaw in both of these vids. The real environment, again, is shame. Hell is shame, not burning. The point of Jesus being crucified was the shame, not being beat up. So there's equity there. To that extent as well, your picture of these people being tortured also fails. I guess you probably know as much about social anthropology as you do about Japanese fiscal policy, so let me put it in a nutshell for you. Shame corresponds with the depth of sin. So your theoretical person who dies with one sin will have an experience corresponding to that level. The clue here again is shame. What hell actually represents is lack of access to God and His kingdom, and all the privileges and work it involves. Not fire and torture and all that childish stuff you're putting out. And I'll add one more thing to make your head spin. You know all those metaphors about the body of Christ? They relate to a concept called group embeddedness. People in a collectivist society understood themselves and their identity in terms of the groups they belonged to. The application here is that in a sense understood by a collectivist society, when Jesus took on death for us and when He was raised, it's fundamentally the same as us having died and been raised. So actually, all your complaints about this being barbaric because a substitute is used are moot. You could properly call Jesus a substitute for us, sure, but the far stronger element is that He represents us, and that Christians have their embedded group identity in Him. Oh yeah, had to say something about this. Real cute, Dark, but you know what? I'm not surprised, because heck, who wants to waste electricity? So there's your epic fail in a nutshell. How about you pick up some real Christian scholarship and get informed for a change?
Christian scholarship? Of course I use Christian scholarship.
That sure explains a lot, doesn't it?
For years, Christian scholarship has been saturated with the answers that completely debunk and destroy the claims of funny atheists like Dark Matter 2525. So if you currently find yourself in some way represented by what you're about to see here, then you are worse than an embarrassment to your cause, because you have for serious education.
Oh, for pity's sake, not you guys again. What do you want this time?
Can you give us some direction?
Yeah, I'll give you a direction. One word. Buzz off, due west.
That's 4 words.
That's right. One for now, and the other 3 for the next 3 times you get it in your pointed heads to contact me. Goodbye. What a couple of maroons. You know, this started quite a while ago, but I can still remember that first day.
Hurry on. Hey, it's us, Dark Matter 2525 and Cult of Dusty.
That's right. Now, we've been making a lot of videos lately, but we ain't never took our game to no Christian apologist.
Yep. We're gonna dance right in there and slap one of them apologists on there silly.
Or make them deconvert.
Yep. They need to get clean of that brainwash problem they have.
Yeah, they probably never even heard of education, or critical thinking, or Darwin.
Yep. But once we get on their case, they'll be on our side.
Oh! I know.
Yeah? Yeah?
There sure can't be no God,
Yeah? Yeah?
because we've sent astronauts up there,
Yeah? Yeah?
and they sure didn't see one.
That's a good one. They'll never refute that. I got another one.
Yeah.
It's from Carl Sagan. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
Oh man, that rhymes too.
Sure. Carl was such a profound thinker, wasn't he?
Yep. No one can hold a candle to old Carl, especially on his history of the library at Alexandria.
Oh, wait, I know.
Yeah, what?
Christians must not believe in God.
Well, that's profound. How do you figure?
Well, they think he's all-knowing and all-seeing, right?
I guess.
So how can they stand it when they go to the bathroom?
Oh, I never thought of that. Whoa, I just had another idea.
Took you long enough.
What's that?
Never mind. What you got?
There's no evidence Jesus existed.
Wow.
Yeah. It's all either been doctored by Christians,
Right?
or produced by Christians,
Yeah?
or written about by Christians.
Okay, time to get on the internet.
Oh, we got something. It's a Christian apologist.
What the... Oh, great. What do you two bozos want?
Hey, he knows who we are.
Yeah, look, you two. I'm busy for the next 16 weeks writing an ebook on the patronage transference model.
But who's this? What's it?
Exactly. So if you want to interact with me, you'd need to make it worth my while. I'm PMing you with a list of books to read. Once you've read them, get back to me. I'm not in the mood for debates with brick walls.
I don't get it. I've had a lot of interesting talks with brick walls.
Hey, here's a list he sent us.
Let's start with the shortest one on there.
Okay, Dark. Since you decided to run your gator about historical stuff again, it looks like I'm going to have to teach you another lesson. I know you get kicks out of the hillbilly gags and the crude sexual jokes, but it's time for some even harder kicks from credible and peer-reviewed scholarship. Only this time the kicks are on you. Well, come to think of it, this vid of yours is 10.5 minutes long, and you've got maybe 30 seconds worth of anything that isn't hillbilly gags and crude sexual jokes. Doesn't leave that much for me to do, but it sure speaks to your grade school intellect, doesn't it? Now first, a practical matter. Your little toad here can't imagine Isaac being fooled by these tricks, or God either, though he doesn't really explain why God needed to be fooled by anything. You seem to have this idea that there's some sort of problem with Jacob getting the blessing by way of deceit. Heh. Lesson 1 this round in the social sciences, Dark. First of all, as you even roundaboutly admit in your vid, God clearly decreed that the elder would serve the younger. Right there, culturally speaking, is God's legal recognition that Jacob is the one who should be given preeminence. So there's no need to fool God in this one, Dark. God not only knows the score, he set up the scoreboard during the pregame. On the other hand, you did leave out something pretty darn important: Esau's careless sale of his own birthright. I imagine you're such a hayseed that you don't think this is important, but let me give you a clue. Your birthright was a central part of your identity and responsibility in this culture. Treating it this flippantly is a pretty fair sign that you don't take it seriously. By agreeing to such an unbalanced trade, Esau not only dishonored himself, he also dishonored his family. So at this point, Jacob has every right to take what's his. But I'll add one more note about your ignorance here. When you get through playing your Xbox, go look up the concept of the honorable thief. No, it's not just some concept from one of your video games. It's a real social role in agonistic societies, and Jacob plays one to the hilt. If you need help understanding the idea, you can watch this movie. It's about at your academic level. Bottom line is you can keep all that crap about rewarding a lie for personal gain. Now, your little bug here also whines that Isaac must be pretty stupid to think that Esau could have hunted down game so quickly, and that it was stupid to fall for the idea that God helped him on the hunt. Not really, given the family history. You remember this? Oh yeah, this would have been part of the family lore, of course. So no, Dark, given that, Isaac would hardly have been surprised by a reply like that. Then your little fly seems to think it amiss that Isaac wouldn't taste that it was goat instead of game, and wouldn't think about the fact that they had plenty of goats around. Well, 2 news flashes here, one medical, one cultural. The medical one is that as humans age, their senses frequently decline in quality. I'll read you a little bit from this qualified medical source. Try to pay attention. The number of taste buds decreases as you age. Each remaining taste bud also begins to lose mass, or atrophy. Sensitivity to the 4 tastes often declines after age 60. In addition, your mouth produces less saliva as you age. This causes dry mouth, which can affect your sense of taste. Now, Dark, as old as Isaac was, there's a darn good chance that he wasn't able to tell the difference between goat and gazelle, especially if it was seasoned up pretty good. Try to think of things like that next time. The cultural aspect is something I cover somewhat in this vid. Basically, Dark, animals like sheep and goats weren't kept for food. They were kept for their products like milk and wool. So no, Isaac wouldn't think for a minute that the meat was from their own goats. Under normal circumstances, their value was too great to simply eat them. Oh yeah, here was one of your favorite parts, I'm sure, where you get to make a lot of hillbilly jokes about marrying cousins. Real cute. Except you need some history lessons. Close family marriages aren't the strict province of hillbillies. In fact, it was also the normal practice of European royalty, as well as major business families like the Rothschilds. There's a reason for that, and it also applied in the time of Jacob. Basically, because family groups were in constant competition for survival, marriage to cousins was a way to keep the resources for survival within the family group. That's a main reason Rebekah wouldn't want Jacob marrying a Hittite, by the way, and why Laban would have preferred it as well. So you can keep the barfing bug to yourself. As I've said, you live in a world with a 7-Eleven on every corner. You don't have to fight off predatory outsiders to survive the way they do. Well, that's pretty much it as far as rational analysis goes from you on this one. Oh, with one exception. You make a big deal about inaccurate science here. And yeah, actually, you're right. What Jacob did is obviously a form of sympathetic magic, putting a striped object in front of the flock so that they had striped offspring. Yes, Jacob was engaged in bunk, no doubt about it, but the joke is on you. You see, you got set up, but the punchline comes later. Here, Jacob indicates that God showed in a dream that Laban was intentionally deceiving him. And here, the reader is now told that God divinely intervened for the purpose of evening the odds that Laban was stacking against Jacob. Jacob obviously did think at first that the sticks were the key to his success, but also obviously God stepped down on Jacob and disabused him of the notion. So, double whammy on you that time. You should have kept reading before you made the vid. So, there's another lesson in socio-cultural exegesis for you. Got anything to say?
Exegesis? Boy, you can play about me using foul language.
I gotta remember that around here, words have a 4-letter limit. Well, Dark, I guess you're going to be making a habit out of producing hayseed commentary about biblical accounts, huh? Yeah, I figured. I guess it does get kind of tiresome going problem of evil 500 different ways. Especially when going to the next stage with authors like Plantinga is so far above your head. Let's start with this really simple screw-up where you complain about God sending angels to Sodom and Gomorrah, and then whine about it being contrary to omnipresence. I see once again you're getting your exegetical competencies from a box of Lucky Charms. What you fail to grasp here is that the word outcry is a technical legal term for a cry for help from a great injustice. In ancient Near Eastern jurisprudence, the judge would have to be present in order to make a judgment. And by that I mean a visible, tangible presence. So what God was saying was that he would exercise the role of an ancient judge. Also, the word for know in this passage has a broad semantic range. It can also mean to recognize or consider, and doesn't imply a previous lack of knowledge automatically. The bottom line is that a judicial context governs interpretation of these words. It doesn't have anything to do one way or the other with omnipresence or omniscience, okay? Sheesh. Alright, second point, and here you'll get half credit because you're right on one matter. This back and forth between God and Abraham on the matter of how many righteous people were in those cities does reflect a classic ancient Near Eastern bartering conversation, like you'd have in the marketplace back then. That much you have right, but you'd be wrong to think it was exclusive to marketplaces. The fact of the matter is, conversations between a master like God and a servant like Abraham frequently took on a dialectical approach like this one. In situations like this, a master would even pretend to be ignorant in order to allow the servant to request intercession, and so properly establish the relationship between them. But seriously now, you put in your little bug's mouth here the words, "Did you honestly think the original Jew wouldn't know how to drive a hard bargain?" Good grief, that's real classy, Dark. No, it's not. It's more racist claptrap. I've had to correct you for being a bigot before, and I'll do it again here. Last time I told you that calling Jews desert people was something the Nazis did as a way to denigrate and insult the Jews. You may not have been aware of that one, but how can you honestly not be aware that the depiction of Jews as bargainers wasn't part of the package of anti-Semitism? Seriously? Come on. Alright, now we get to what I expect you thought was the juiciest part of the story given your perverse anti-historical perspective. Let me make this very simple, and you better sit down. The men of Sodom were not practicing homosexuals. Yes, that's what I said. Pick yourself up off the floor and listen carefully. What you don't get here is that homosexual rape was perceived as an act of dominance. I'm sure you've heard it said even today that rape is not a crime of sex but of power. Well, in this case, more so. The point here was to show these visitors who is in charge and destroy their personal honor. So while I'm sure you are enjoying all the rectal jokes, you missed the point because your grasp of the cultural context comes off a bag of Cheetos. Now, in further light of that, here's how you also failed to grasp the point of Lot offering his virgin daughters. Like I said, the whole point here was dominance, not sex. Now, as I've told you only about 400 times now, this was a society based on honor. To the men of Sodom, raping the visitors was a way to shame them and gain honor for themselves in their own eyes. But yo, Dark, here's the clue. There wasn't any honor in raping virgin girls whatsoever. This was the equivalent to the men of Sodom demanding to fight John Wayne, and Lot saying, "Nah, you don't want to do that. Here, fight Pee Wee Herman instead." There's nothing here of Lot literally offering his daughters for sex. It's a calculated insult to the men of Sodom. Got it? Good. Oh, another clue for you, Dark. You're screwing up by thinking there's some issue with Lot's potential sons-in-law not being of the men of Sodom. The specific word used for men in the phrase men of the city is this one. It's one of several translated men, but this particular one has a specific connotation, which refers to men of somewhat upper class. In other words, you might say in this case, the elders of the city of Sodom. Not all the men. Capiche? Oh, Just briefly, Dark. Go look up the word genocide. It means the deliberate killing of someone solely because of their indelible group membership. In other words, this would be genocide only if these people were being killed for being of a particular social, racial, or national group, not because of some judgment over sin. Try to keep up. Now, you make a pretty big deal here about all the problems Lot would have making his daughters pregnant. Well, I don't know about that. The oldest fathers on record are in their 80s and 90s. As for the connection between alcohol and erectile dysfunction, yeah, that's true. But here's a few things you need to check. Lot would have enjoyed the traditional Mediterranean diet, and I'll quote this article here. Recent studies show that ED is relatively uncommon among men who eat a traditional Mediterranean diet, which includes fruits, vegetables, whole grains, heart-healthy fats including nuts, and olive oil, fish, and wine, particularly red. And then this part. There is no evidence that mild or even moderate alcohol consumption is bad for erectile function, but chronic heavy drinking can cause liver damage, nerve damage, and other conditions, such as interfering with the normal balance of male sex hormone levels that can lead to ED. Now, Dark, Lot was drunk just once here as far as we know. You got any evidence for chronic heavy drinking on his part? I didn't think so. Nice try. I found plenty of other information, and it suggests that while being drunk can cause ED, it's not a definite thing. So I think you better take basic sex ed again, then move on to qualified medical journals after you grow up. Oh, another issue. In addition, between various medical factors, there's actually a pretty significant window within which a woman can get pregnant. So it's not quite as out of the question for Lot's two daughters to get pregnant by him as you're implying. Still, we don't even need to go there in the first place, because there's a far more likely literary explanation. You need to go watch my series on the oral tradition background of the Bible. Basically, we can see in this portion a roughly dechronologized narrative, one in which events are compressed in time in order to make it far easier to remember the story. I know you're used to reading the text like a fundamentalist. Don't do that, okay? One last thing. I gotta wonder how much you actually know these stories after this part. You're having Abraham meet Lot for the first time here. Dark, check back in Genesis 11:31. Lot is Abraham's nephew, and they have an extended conversation in Genesis 13. So do us all a favor. Instead of going to crap like the Bible Reloaded for information, try a few scholarly commentaries, okay?
Do you mind cutting it with the scholarship stuff? I'm trying to think up some more rear-end jokes.
I should know better than to disturb him when he's devoting that much brain power to anything. Well, I have to admit I'm a little surprised. I was expecting to find a few more of your vids I could sink my teeth into, but between all this stuff about you just trying to be funny and stuff outside my subject expertise, there's just not a whole lot left. So, I guess you could call this a sort of potpourri of remarks. Let's start with this. Good night, this is stupid. Dark, do you ever plan to use something more scholarly than that children's Bible in your dentist's office to understand what these texts are saying? Look, the word heaven in the Old Testament wasn't used to refer to God's spiritual abode. It meant the sky. You know how high that means? Check out these passages. Yeah, it just means basically high up above man's height. And here's what else you missed. Scholars who comment on this passage indicate that the Tower of Babel is to be understood as one of these, a ziggurat. That word comes from an Akkadian word that means to build high. The whole point of the ziggurat was to imitate a sacred mountain, a place where humans were supposed to be able to come into contact with the gods. Kind of like an ancient telephone booth to the divine. As you can see though, these things aren't skyscrapers. So all of this has nothing to do with stuff like the Seer's Tower. The rulers of pagan nations put their names on these things, and that's what it means when they say they were trying to make a name for themselves. It was an honor and legacy thing. Okay? Good. Oh, this one. Hard to take this one seriously. It doesn't have anything like an argument in it, but let me give you an example of how out of touch you are. You have your childish God figure on here apologizing for damaging people's self-esteem. Dark. Did you know that the idea of self-esteem only cropped up within the last 150 to 200 years? It's a product of individualism and modern Western psychological experience. God's got nothing to apologize for, so stop being so insecure. This one. This is typical of your short shrifting of Christian evidences again. Like I said, it'd be a lot easier to take you seriously if your scholarship didn't come off of tubes of Preparation H. Now, here I will give you some credit. You're right in the explanation you gave. But, come on. How do we know what's literal and what's not? You ever hear of things like genre and contextual study? How do you tell when someone says that they're going to blow you away whether they mean it literally or figuratively? I mean, do you hear that and put up giant wind guards because you don't know how to determine whether it's figurative or literal? Please. So, I guess that's it. Well, I may have one more surprise later. You got anything to say for yourself?
Did you say potpourri? I know your chaplet.
Yep, the Bible in the dentist office and the dictionary in the supermarket checkout line.
I've been told that there have been a lot of intelligent people throughout history who have believed in God. That's true. While you ponder the significance of that, I'd like you to
consider Goofus. This is Goofus, and he's a very intelligent guy. He heard a pretty ridiculous claim from an anonymous source. He immediately didn't believe it and went about his day without giving it further thought. Later, Goofus heard a friendly acquaintance make the ridiculous claim. But despite the claim's ridiculousness, Goofus trusted the source, so he actually believed it. Yet because the ridiculous claim isn't actually true, you might think that it won't be too difficult to convince Goofus that he shouldn't believe it. And at this point, indeed, it might not be too difficult to convince him of the truth. I mean, he is an intelligent guy. Now let's change the circumstances. Let's say that Goofus was raised from birth to believe the ridiculous claim. If that's the case, it will be much more difficult to convince Goofus that the claim isn't true. After all, it was taught to him and consistently reinforced throughout his life by his parents, the very people nature has set him up to trust the most, regardless of their knowledge, or lack thereof, of the actual truth. Now let's change the circumstances again. Let's say that not only was Goofus raised from birth to believe the ridiculous claim, but that the community of people who live around Goofus and his family were also raised believing the same ridiculous claim. At this point, Goofus's belief will be reinforced by many other people besides his blood relatives, including probably his spouse. His belief will be considered the norm, and anything that contradicts it will seem alien and wrong. Now it will be very difficult to convince Goofus that the ridiculous claim is wrong.
So let's explain a bit more about my parody reply to Dark Matter's vid on intelligent people believing in God. In many ways, it's just the sort of usual dreck we expect from a fundy atheist. Intelligent people believing in God is a sort of epistemic problem, because some fundy atheists find it helpful to associate atheism exclusively with intelligence. Of course, that does leave open the problem of why there are so many stupid atheists who believe so many crazy things. But I suppose we won't get into that. Dark Solution is a common one, which is a variation on one of the most favored canards out there. The old "if you'd been born here, you'd be a whatever it is you're not, rather than what it is you are now" routine. And granted, that might be true in most instances. But it's just as applicable in other scenarios, and atheism is an excuse from that epistemic scenario. The communities of atheists may be a lot smaller, but we still have atheist parents who raise kids. So in the end, this whole argument amounts to an insult which implies that only atheist parents can raise kids who can think sufficiently for themselves. To illustrate the folly of this argument, I drew from a certain analogy that was used to defeat one of fundy atheist's favorite heroes, David Hume. Hume was fond of a variation on this argument, about where you were born as a way to explain how you come to believe things like Jesus rising from the dead. According to Hume, the reason people believed Jesus rose from the dead was because people in the New Testament world didn't have enough good sense, education, and learning. Therefore, they were more subject to delusion than sensible, educated, and learned people like Hume. Contemporary critics of Hume sensed the weakness in this argument and retorted with an example of a prince from a tropical climate who had never seen ice. By Hume's reasoning, the prince is just as validated in not believing in ice as the modern fundy atheist might be validated in rejecting miracle testimony. The bottom line in all of this is one thing Dark gets right even as he misses the importance of it. The objective truth is always out there regardless of what we think. But that isn't gotten around by saying we only believe what we do because of the community we were raised in, or the country we were born in. It's really just a dodge, and a shortcut used by fundy atheists to avoid dealing with the real arguments, and facing up to the possibility that intelligent people might just believe in God because they're intelligent. See you next time. I have to admit I'm not always sure how seriously to take some of this stuff. I mean, at your level it's hard to tell if you're trying to be funny or if you're just plain ignorant. I like to give the benefit of the doubt as much as any guy, but come on. Now take this for example. I don't know if you really mean this or if you just did it as a joke so you could give Saul a Napoleon complex. Just in case though, you ought to know that you're actually right. That description would not be influenced by Saul whatsoever, apart from if he actually was a head taller. Saul didn't control the tradition, the priesthood did, and I might remind you that Saul was pretty well on the outs with that group. If anything, they'd be more inclined to make Saul out to be dishonorable. Anyway, I don't expect someone like you who lives in an air-conditioned home with a toaster and a freezer to understand exactly why ancient warfare was so severe. It may not occur to you that anyone left alive considered themselves duty-bound to take vengeance. I'll link to an article in the vid description that will explain a few hard realities to you. But as a tip, camels and other animals weren't pets. They were the functional equivalent to tanks, rations, and other military supplies. So before you get too incredulous, try living in their world for a while. Oh, one more thing. Have your bug have his asthma looked after. Killing in the name of God, has not historically been a major problem. Religion has been the core cause of very, very few armed conflicts over history. I'll put another link in the vid description for you to get an education from. Meanwhile, quit transplanting your modern obsessions into the past. Oh yeah, that goofy how can God repent and change his mind routine. Baby stuff. I'm God. You think that's how we explain it? Yeah, sheesh. Link, vid description again. Okay? Yeah, one other thing you're probably too stupid to think of. By sacrificing these animals himself, Saul wasn't just disobeying an order. He was also showing that he intended to usurp the power and position of the priesthood. He was also putting himself in Samuel's position and declaring that he, Saul, spoke for God. Now, you wouldn't want church and state to be unified, would you, Dark? I didn't think so. Anyway, when you get done with the cutesy soda jokes, look up some stuff about agonistic societies and find out just how serious an offense that really was. You seem to have a problem with wars in the name of God, so I gotta wonder why you didn't have a problem with Saul doing something that advanced towards validating that very proposition. More babyish stuff here. All this from your bug about God coming up with a lame story to protect someone? Well, gee, Dark, sorry, but God isn't obliged to entertain you with pyrotechnics. What, you think God should have erected a glittering Borg force field around Samuel for protection? Why? You just turn around and say that that's yet another miracle that proves that the Bible is a fairy tale. Make up your mind. Now here, a quick lesson in pneumatology. I know you got this childlike understanding of things, like hell is a literal place of fire and all, but that's wrong. And so is this. 1 Samuel 16:14 isn't referring to a demonic being. First of all, the word evil is the same one used in Isaiah 45:7, which I talked about in this vid. It doesn't refer to moral evil. It means basically something troubling or calamitous. Second, the word for spirit is the same one that's used to refer to wind, or in more abstract terms, to influence. So what we have here isn't a demon for hire. It's a more abstract kind of thing. And since he hires David to play the harp to cure what ails him, it's more likely that Saul had something like what we'd call an attack of conscience. Try not to let the omen govern your exegesis, huh? Pretty funny, too. Your scholarship looks like it came off of BuzzFeed. Now, last thing. You think it's an amazing coincidence that Saul sends for David? Not really. You're missing the social science aspect again. David's father was a well-off tribal chieftain. The fact that he could afford to buy a harp for David tells you that much. If Saul called for help from anyone, he was going to call on a member of that very limited class of people, which was less than 1% of the population. Yeah, that's right. David was part of that day's 1%. So no, there's nothing coincidental about this at all. It's the result of limited available choices. That's it for now. I'll get to part 2 later. Meanwhile, you and your fans need to read this to find out why you continue to believe ridiculous things about Christianity even after you deconvert. Pretty mind-blowing. Out of morbid curiosity, after you get done with Samuel's books, any idea what you'll do next?
I was gonna do the book of Hezekiah. Can you tell me where to find that?
Yeah, I'll bet after that he'll do one on 2 Corinthians. So here we are at part 2 of your treatment of the books of Samuel. At this point, the only question is whether or not you do a more competent job at biblical commentary than Roscoe P. Coltrane. That and whether you're having delusions of being an animated version of Cecil B. DeMille. Now let's get this over with. Now to start, I may as well correct you on something pretty basic. You've fallen for the usual kindergarten rendition on Goliath's recorded height. Makes for a good cartoon, but it's lousy scholarship. Here's an article you might want to consider reading to correct that Sunday school story you're still reading into the text. What's that? No, sorry. It doesn't have any pictures you can color. Alright, next big foul-up. What's with this single punch and superpowers crap? You sure didn't get that from the text. The word used there is a pretty general one. It can be used of striking with a hand, a weapon, or even defeating an army. How exactly David killed these predators is a matter of researching the normal way such things were done in 1100 BC. A sling is probably the likeliest option. And one other hint. The largest bears in Palestine were only 400 pounds. You're falling for the usual shtick of displacing American grizzlies to the other side of the world. Probably too much to ask you to even get that kind of thing right. Amazingly, you go several minutes with plenty of crude humor, but no real mistakes. I hope it was a joke when you said the name of Saul's daughter was a man's name. Probably was a joke. Just in case, though, the most probable meaning of her name is from a word meaning brook or stream. Kind of feminine, right? Like Brooke Shields. Now on this, Saul's demand for Philistine foreskins. There's actually a couple of good reasons for that, and I'm almost sure you know it had nothing to do with making a coat out of them. The first thing is that they were a pretty clear and convenient guarantee that the owner of the foreskin was dead. The second thing is that it was guaranteed to get the Philistines stoked against David, because it was an extreme dishonor he was putting on them. Yes, you got that much right. Saul is doing his best to get David killed. What's that your bug said? Why would Saul think David wasn't capable of this with 1,000 men at his disposal? Well, get the point, at least as far as what Saul had in mind. Dishonor, followed by more Philistines on David's back. Look at what that actually means. Saul is so intent on eliminating David as a rival that he's willing to sacrifice 1,000 men to get the job done. Presumably you've heard of tyrants who are just as free with their human resources, right? Now seriously, you see David going out and finding Philistines all alone and taking 1,000 men after them to ask for voluntary contributions of their foreskins? No. What's in mind here is combat between large parties, Dark. This is part of the war in progress, and the foreskins were taken again as proof of death in pitched battle. This had to have been one of your more ridiculous readings of the text, or else one of your stupider jokes. As usual, it's hard to decide which one. So anyway, I guess now we're waiting around for part 3. Any chance you'll get yourself an education before then?
What do you mean, get myself an education? I'm getting one right now from this official guide to the Bible.
Why bother? He's his own best punchline.